Arthur Thorne, in a faded server jacket, navigated the shimmering chaos of the tech mixer. A prominent investor, Dominic Sterling, caught his eye, a sneer twisting his lips. "Look at this," Sterling drawled, loud enough to carry. "How the mighty have fallen." Thorne felt the words like a physical blow, a familiar ache deep in his chest, but his hands remained steady as he offered a tray of sparkling water to a group of laughing executives. From the main stage, the panel of affluent investors, led by Sterling, launched into a tirade of thinly veiled jokes about banker failures and old money mistakes. Sterling's gaze, sharp and triumphant, flickered directly to Thorne, a cruel punctuation mark to his jibe about those who couldn't keep up. The casual cruelty was a hum beneath the polished laughter, a constant reminder of his new place. In the back rows, Elara Vance, a journalist whose pen often felt heavier than her heart, barely registered the panel's droning platitudes. Her editor wanted a, quote, puff piece on the future of innovation, a bland assignment that tasted like stale coffee. Innovation, asterisk, she scoffed internally, is rarely found in gilded cages. She craved the grit of truth, the jagged edges of a story that truly mattered, not this polished performance. Her fingers idly sketched a caricature of Sterling in her notepad, her mind already drifting, seeking something real in the superficial glow. Then her gaze drifted past the stage, past the preening investors, to the periphery, where a server moved with an almost ethereal quietude. It was the man Sterling had targeted, Arthur Thorne. Despite the worn uniform and the obvious snubs he endured, Thorne carried himself with an unexpected, profound dignity. His movements were efficient, his expression reserved, but Elara, with her journalist's eye for micro-expressions, caught it. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of pain deep in his tired eyes, as another investor's dismissive comment about those who gamble with other people's money drifted his way. It was a fleeting shadow, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough. This wasn't just a disgraced banker, she realized. This was a man carrying a story, a weight, far heavier than any coffee tray. A question bloomed in her mind. What truly happened to Arthur Thorne? Elara Vance sat at a makeshift desk, the drone of the conference center a dull thrum beyond her cubicle. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, multiple browser tabs open, each a window into Arthur Thorne's public downfall. She had conducted quick, superficial interviews with several investors, each one parroting the same story of Thorne's catastrophic failure, his reckless decisions that had cratered his firm. The official news reports, a digital graveyard of his former glory, painted a consistent picture: sole culpability, an unforgivable breach of trust. Yet the uniformity of their disdain, the almost rehearsed condemnation, felt less like truth and more like a carefully constructed narrative. A subtle, discordant note hummed beneath the surface, a feeling that something essential was missing from this perfectly packaged disgrace. Late that night, hunched over her laptop in the quiet gloom of her apartment, Elara delved deeper. She bypassed mainstream news, digging into obscure financial forums, archived blogs, the digital detritus where suppressed truths sometimes lingered. Here, amidst the clamor of forgotten opinions, faint whispers emerged. Mentions of Thorne being too ethical, of rocking the boat at his old firm, brief anonymous comments quickly buried under the official narrative. They were dismissed as conspiracy theories, the ramblings of disgruntled junior analysts. But Elara's journalistic instinct, a finely tuned instrument for discord, vibrated with recognition. These weren't just rumors. They were faint echoes of a different story, a puzzle piece that refused to fit the established picture. The next evening, Elara shadowed Thorne. He clocked out, his movements methodical, weary. Instead of heading towards the sleek high-rises or leafy suburbs one might expect of a former banker, he boarded a city bus, its destination sign a blur of unfamiliar routes. Elara, discreetly a few seats behind, watched the city lights transform. Gilded towers gave way to grimy brick, polished glass to rust-streaked metal. The air grew heavier with the scent of industry, far from the perfumed halls of power. Thorne, a ghost of his former self, exited in a rundown industrial district, his silhouette swallowed by the encroaching dusk, leaving Elara to wonder where this unexpected path would lead. Thorne approached a nondescript, windowless building, its exterior as anonymous as his current life. He opened the heavy metal door, a sliver of warm light spilling onto the cracked pavement before he disappeared inside. Moments later, the door creaked open again. A young, bright-eyed girl, Maya, emerged, clutching a worn backpack. She looked up, a quick, grateful smile flashing at the unseen Thorne, mouthing a silent, "Thank you," before hurrying away into the shadows. Thorne re-entered, the door clicking shut, leaving Elara in the darkness, bewildered. The quiet dignity she'd observed at the conference, the hidden pain, now coalesced into a profound mystery. He was involved in something significant here, something warm and alive, but what? The unmarked building, a hulk of stained brick and grimy windows, offered no hint of the life it held within. Elara Vance, feigning interest in a local community outreach piece, secured a tour. She expected dusty workshops, perhaps a few outdated computers. What greeted her inside was a jolt of pure, vibrant possibility. Walls splashed with bold murals of circuits and code, the hum of servers, and the focused glow of dozens of monitors. Young faces, diverse and alight with concentration, bent over keyboards, their fingers flying. In one corner, a student meticulously assembled a drone. In another, a group debated lines of Python. This wasn't a rundown charity. It was a bustling, modern tech school, a haven named the Foundry. The contrast between its drab exterior and the electric energy within was as stark as night and day. "Impressive," Elara murmured to the cheerful coordinator, but her thoughts pulsed with a deeper question. Who built this, and why hide it? Elara drifted through the classrooms, observing. Then she saw him. Arthur Thorne, not in his server uniform, but in a simple, pressed shirt, standing before a whiteboard filled with complex algorithms. His voice, usually quiet and distant, now resonated with calm authority, explaining a concept with a patient, almost tender clarity. He moved among the students, offering quiet guidance, his large hands gesturing with a practiced ease that belied his former life in finance. Elara watched Maya, the young woman from the alley, her eyes glued to Thorne, soaking up every word. Later, as students filed out, Elara overheard whispers of Mr. Thorne, spoken with reverence, with a gratitude that transcended mere instruction. He wasn't just teaching code, he was igniting futures. A warmth spread through Elara, a surprising empathy for the man she had only known as a public pariah. His disgrace felt less like failure and more like a carefully constructed illusion. Later, in the Foundry's small, surprisingly organized administrative office, Elara found her opening. While the coordinator stepped away, she scanned the financial ledger. The numbers told a compelling story. Consistent, substantial donations kept the Foundry afloat, far beyond what local grants could provide. But the donor listed? Always anonymous. Yet the dates, the amounts, they had a rhythm. A rhythm that, to Elara's sharp journalistic eye, seemed to echo another timeline, the precise moment of Arthur Thorne's public downfall. His assets, his settlements, the remnants of a once vast fortune. It was too neat, too perfectly aligned. The disgraced banker had lost everything. Yet this school, this beacon of hope, appeared to be sustained by the ghost of his wealth. A cold suspicion, sharp and insistent, began to crystallize in Elara's mind. Back in her cramped apartment, surrounded by a constellation of documents and glowing screens, Elara connected the invisible threads. She cross-referenced the Foundry's anonymous donations with Thorne's old firm's public reports and, crucially, with the new firm where Dominic Sterling and his slick investors now reigned. The names blurred, the dates swam, but patterns emerged. Subtle shifts in ownership, sudden transfers of assets, a convenient restructuring that had allowed certain individuals to walk away unscathed, while Thorne bore the full brunt of the public's fury. It was a web, intricate and insidious, suggesting not an isolated failure, but a calculated purge. A red string, metaphorically, began to stretch across Elara's corkboard, connecting Thorne's solemn face to Sterling's smug grin. Her suspicion was no longer a flicker. It was a burning certainty. The final piece of the puzzle arrived with the first sliver of dawn, pulled from a deep dive into obscure financial archives. A heavily redacted internal report, buried in a forgotten corner of a digital database, coupled with fragments of leaked communications. Elara's breath hitched as she pieced it together. Not a failure, but a fight. Arthur Thorne, the quiet banker, had been a whistleblower. He had tried to expose the very fraud that brought down his firm, the fraud that had enriched men like Dominic Sterling and shattered Thorne's own life. The documents were a ghost of a righteous battle, confirming that Thorne had lost everything, not through recklessness, but through an act of profound, principled sacrifice. A wave of righteous indignation washed over Elara. The man they mocked was no disgraced banker. He was a silent hero, crucified by the very people who now profited from his ruin. The scattered documents on Elara's apartment floor told a story more devastating than any headline. Arthur Thorne's life, laid bare in balance sheets, internal memos, and leaked emails, was a tragic map of sacrifice. Every piece confirmed it. His whistleblowing, his desperate fight against the very fraud that Dominic Sterling and his ilk now profited from, had cost him everything. Public disgrace, financial ruin, a career evaporated. And the foundry, that beacon of hope in the city's shadows, was not funded by some secret benefactor, but by the last vestiges of Thorne's own fortune, slowly bleeding dry. It wasn't just a lost job, it was a life undone, meticulously dismantled by the very people he had tried to expose. A simmering rage, cold and righteous, tightened its grip on Elara's heart. This wasn't just a story. It was an injustice screaming for the light. Elara found Arthur Thorne on a quiet park bench, the setting sun painting long shadows across his weary face. He looked smaller, more vulnerable, away from the bustling kitchen of the tech mixer or the hopeful energy of the foundry. She sat beside him, the rustle of her bag holding the evidence like a weight between them. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I know." She laid a printout of the redacted report on the bench, not pushing, just presenting. He stared at it, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps, or a deep, familiar pain. After a long, heavy silence, he nodded. "They left me with a choice," he murmured, his voice raspy. "My silence or their destruction. I chose neither. I chose truth, and they chose to bury me with it." His confession wasn't an admission of guilt, but a quiet, somber burden he had carried for too long. Thorne turned to Elara, his gaze intense, pleading. "But the foundry, Elara," he said, his voice gaining a quiet passion that startled her. "That cannot be jeopardized. My reputation, my name, they are nothing. But those students, their future is everything. If my name is attached to the funding, if this whole messy business is dragged into the public eye, it will attract attention, the wrong kind of attention. They might lose their grants, their space. The kids, they deserve a fresh start, untainted by the shadows of my past." He looked away, his jaw tight. "Let me remain anonymous. Let the foundry continue to be a place of pure, uncompromised opportunity. Please, that is all I ask." His words hung in the air, a selfless plea that twisted Elara's journalistic instincts into a knot of ethical conflict. Back in her apartment, the silence pressed in, amplifying Thorne's plea. Protecting the foundry. Protecting the vulnerable youth. It was a noble request, a hero's sacrifice. But Elara stared at her notes, at the names of Sterling and his cohorts, at the sheer audacity of their continued deceit. True protection, she realized, wasn't silence. It was light. It was exposing the rot, not just protecting the bloom. To let them continue to mock Thorne, to let their corruption fester, was to allow the very forces that threatened the foundry to remain unchallenged. She took a deep breath, a fierce conviction settling in her bones. Sometimes, kindness wasn't quiet. Sometimes, justice demanded a roar. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the first words of her exposé burning onto the screen. The air shimmered with the reflected glow of 1,000 tiny LED lights and the clinking of champagne flutes. Another product launch, another celebration of innovation and ambition, draped in opulence that felt almost aggressive in its display. Arthur Thorne, a ghost in a crisp but familiar server's uniform, moved through the gilded throng, offering platters of artisanal canapes. His movements were efficient, his gaze fixed on the polished floor, the quiet rhythm of his work, a shield against the glittering, oblivious crowd. On the colossal stage, bathed in a spotlight so bright it seemed to scorch the air, stood Dominic Sterling. He projected confidence, his voice booming with rehearsed enthusiasm, touting the latest disruptive technology, a thinly veiled promise of more riches to come. He spoke of vision, of progress, of the future, entirely unaware that his past was about to collide with his carefully constructed present. Sterling paused, his eyes sweeping over the audience with a predatory gleam, before landing, almost accidentally, on Arthur Thorne. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his face, a private joke shared with the universe. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with saccharine sarcasm. "And, of course," he began, a chuckle rippling through the front rows, "we must remember the importance of integrity in finance. Not everyone has what it takes, you see. Some falter, some succumb to failed ambition." His gaze, sharp and cruel, pinned Thorne for a fleeting, excruciating moment. A wave of snickers rippled through the audience, a collective, casual dismissal of the man in the uniform. Thorne's hand, holding a tray of drinks, clenched imperceptibly. He felt the familiar sting. A raw wound reopened, but this time it was different. This time, he knew it was the last time. He lowered his gaze, enduring, a quiet storm brewing behind his tired eyes. The applause for Sterling's cutting jest began, polite and unthinking, a testament to the crowd's complicity in the charade. But then, a new voice, clear and resonant, cut through the din like a perfectly tuned instrument. "Excuse me," Elara Vance stated, stepping purposefully into the center aisle, a microphone appearing in her hand as if by magic. Her presence commanded attention, her stride confident, utterly unafraid. The polite applause faltered, then died, replaced by a sudden, expectant hush. Sterling, mid-bow, froze, his confident smile replaced by a look of bewildered annoyance. Elara met his gaze, unwavering. "Elara Vance, investigative journalist. I believe there's a slight correction needed regarding integrity and failed ambition." All eyes, including Arthur Thorne's, now wide with shock, pivoted to Elara. The air crackled. The game had changed. "You see," Elara continued, her voice gaining power, "Mr. Sterling speaks of integrity, yet he and his partners built their empire on the ruins of Arthur Thorne's honesty." The crowd gasped, a collective wave of disbelief washing over the room. Arthur Thorne, the man you've just mocked, was not a failure. He was a whistleblower. On the massive screen behind the stage, instead of gleaming tech, a redacted internal report flashed, then leaked emails, then a financial ledger with highlighted discrepancies. He found fraud within his firm, a fraud orchestrated to benefit those who now stand on this stage, basking in undeserved glory. He tried to expose it, sacrificing his career, his reputation, everything he had. Sterling's face contorted in a mask of panicked denial, his frantic whispers to his partners growing louder. While Arthur Thorne lost his entire world fighting for what was right, Elara concluded, her voice a righteous hammer blow. "You, Mr. Sterling, gained yours by burying the truth." Dominic Sterling, his face a contorted mask of frantic denial, jabbered into a dead microphone. "This is slander, a smear campaign. Our firm is beyond reproach." But his bluster was a flimsy shield against the avalanche of truth Elara had unleashed. Just then, a ripple moved through the stunned audience. A young woman, barely out of her teens, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Arthur Thorne. It was Maya. Her voice, though soft, cut through Sterling's panicked protests with the clear ring of truth. "He saved my future," she said, her eyes shining with fierce gratitude. "Mr. Thorne gave me hope when no one else would. He taught us to build, to dream." Her words, simple and profound, were a final, crushing blow. Murmurs turned to a growing wave of applause, directed not at the stage, but at Arthur, who stood amidst the debris of his former life, a quiet dignity settling over him. Sterling and his partners, their faces pale with shame and fury, were finally led away, their grand facade shattered, their carefully constructed lies collapsing under the weight of a young girl's unwavering truth. The opulent ballroom, moments ago a crucible of revelation, now lay in disarray. Scattered programs, overturned chairs, the lingering scent of champagne and scandal. In a quiet corner away from the last stragglers and the flashing cameras, Arthur Thorne and Elara Vance stood. The weight of years, of undeserved scorn, seemed to have lifted from Arthur's shoulders, leaving a profound, weary relief in its wake. He turned to Elara, his eyes, once guarded, now filled with a deep, unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low, sincere whisper, "for seeing beyond the headlines." Elara simply nodded, a professional satisfaction gleaming in her gaze. "The truth needed a voice, Arthur." He looked out at the emptied space, a faint smile touching his lips. "Perhaps now," he mused, "the foundry can truly flourish, protected not by shadows but by the light of truth." His words carried the quiet hope of a man who had finally found peace, not in vengeance, but in vindication. Months later, the Foundry Tech School pulsed with a vibrant, undeniable energy. Its once discreet facade now proudly displayed a new, polished sign, and students flowed through its doors, their faces alight with purpose. Donations, once anonymous, now poured in openly, fueled by the story Elara had so powerfully told. Arthur Thorne, no longer the disgraced banker or the silent server, taught a robotics class with a renewed vigor, his passion infectious. Maya, now an advanced student, assisted him, her confidence soaring. Elara visited, blending into the background, observing the bustling classrooms, the hum of machinery, the bright, hopeful faces. A sense of profound fulfillment settled over her. This wasn't just a story, it was a living, breathing testament to integrity, a legacy built not on wealth, but on quiet courage and selfless sacrifice. The world, in its relentless churn, often forgets what true heroism looks like. It chases headlines of fortune, applauds the grand and the ostentatious, and too readily dismisses the humble. But sometimes, a single story, like Arthur Thorne's, cuts through the noise. It reminds us that true worth isn't measured in bank accounts or public acclaim, but in the quiet courage to stand against corruption, the profound sacrifice for others, and the lasting impact of a selfless heart. His journey, from public pariah to a beacon of hope, proved that integrity, though often tested in the shadows, will always, eventually, shine brightest in the light.